I paid for my daughter's entire $75,000 wedding, but 3 weeks before the ceremony, she told me I wasn't welcome anymore. Little did she know, the prenuptial agreement I insisted on writing would change everything in ways none of us expected. My name is Eleanor Winters. At 52, I've survived 2 wars, raised 2 children alone after my husband died in combat, and built a successful security consulting firm from scratch. Military precision and planning had guided every aspect of my life, until my daughter Cassandra's wedding threw everything into chaos. It was a crisp September morning when the certified letter arrived. I recognized Cassandra's lawyer's firm name in the return address, which struck me as odd. My daughter and I had spoken just 3 days earlier about the final floral arrangements for her upcoming wedding. Everything had seemed perfectly normal. Then, she'd laughed at my suggestions for incorporating blue thistles, a nod to my Scottish heritage, but ultimately agreed they'd make a unique addition to the centerpieces. I poured myself a cup of coffee before sitting down at my kitchen table to open the envelope. Inside was a formal letter, the legal language cold and detached. On behalf of our client, Cassandra Winters, we regret to inform you that your invitation to her wedding ceremony and reception on October 12th has been rescinded. Additionally, our client requests that you refrain from contacting her or attempting to attend the event. The coffee turned bitter in my mouth. My hands began to tremble, not from fear. I'd faced down far worse in my 22 years with the Army Corps of Engineers, but from a deep, searing confusion that quickly hardened into anger. I reached for my phone to call Cassandra, then stopped myself, remembering the letter's warning about contact. Instead, I called my son, Michael, who was supposed to be giving his sister away at the ceremony. "Mom?" His voice was wary, hesitant, in a way that immediately told me he knew. "Did you know about this?" I kept my tone even, the same voice I'd used when commanding teams through dangerous territories. A heavy sigh. "She told me last night. I tried to talk her out of it, but..." "What happened, Michael? 3 days ago, we were discussing flowers. Now I'm served with a legal notice not to attend a wedding I'm paying for?" Michael hesitated. "It's Richard. He convinced her that having you there would create unnecessary tension because of your concerns about him." Richard Blackwood, my future son-in-law, a man whose smooth charm had never sat right with me. When Cassandra had brought him home 18 months ago, something in his carefully constructed demeanor had triggered the same warning signals I'd learned to heed in combat zones. Nothing obvious, just inconsistencies in the stories he told, the way his smile never quite reached his eyes when he thought no one was looking. I had expressed my reservations to Cassandra once, only once, 3 months after they'd started dating. She'd dismissed them as overprotection, and I'd decided to trust her judgment. After all, she was 32, a successful pediatric surgeon with a sharp mind. Who was I to question her choice of partner? But as their relationship progressed, small red flags continued to appear. Richard's insistence on monitoring Cassandra's whereabouts, the way her vibrant personality seemed to dim in his presence, how she'd gradually lost touch with friends she'd known since medical school. Then came the incident at Christmas when I'd overheard him berating her for speaking too long with a male colleague at her hospital's holiday party. When I'd confronted Cassandra later, she'd brushed it off as a simple misunderstanding. "Mom? Are you still there?" Michael's voice pulled me back to the present. "Yes." "What exactly did she say?" "That you've never accepted Richard, that you've been undermining their relationship from the beginning. She said Richard thinks it would be better if you weren't there to..." How did she put it? "Cast a shadow over their special day." The irony was bitter. I had indeed insisted on one thing when Cassandra announced their engagement, a prenuptial agreement. Given that my security consulting business was worth nearly $4.2 million, with Cassandra set to inherit half, I felt it was a reasonable precaution. Richard had initially balked, but when Cassandra stood firm, one of the few times I'd seen her stand up to him, he had reluctantly agreed. I had paid for the lawyers, both hers and his. I had even helped draft the agreement, including several clauses that my own attorney had suggested based on my unusually detailed concerns about Richard's character. At the time, I told myself I was simply being thorough, the same methodical approach I'd applied throughout my military career. Now, it seemed those precautions had cost me my place at my daughter's wedding. She can't be serious, Michael. I've paid for everything. The venue, the catering, the flowers, her dress. Over $75,000, not to mention the time I've invested. I know, Mom. It's insane. But she's different now. When I tried to reason with her, she just repeated the same phrases over and over like she was reciting lines. It was honestly creepy. My military training kicked in then. When faced with an unexpected situation, assess, adapt, and find a strategic response. Michael, I need you to do something for me. Stay close to your sister. Don't antagonize Richard or make waves. Just keep your eyes open and be there for her. Can you do that? Of course. But what are you going to do? I looked down at the letter, again at the formal legal letterhead and the cold dismissal of my role in my daughter's life. I'm going to respect her wishes for now, but I'm also going to make some calls. After hanging up, I sat at my kitchen table for a long time, staring at the wedding invitation that had been displayed on my refrigerator for months. The elegant cream-colored card with gold foil lettering now seemed to mock me. I'd always had a complicated relationship with Cassandra. She'd been only 12 when her father, my husband James, was killed in Afghanistan. In her grief, she'd become distant, rebellious in ways that my more easygoing son hadn't. Our arguments during her teenage years had been legendary, but I'd always believed we'd forged a stronger bond through those conflicts. After she went to college, things improved. By the time she finished medical school, I'd thought we'd finally found our equilibrium, mutual respect, if not always perfect understanding. Now I wondered if that had been an illusion. I picked up my phone again and called Vanessa Chen, my attorney and close friend since our days serving together. Vanessa had helped me establish my security consulting firm after I retired from the military, and she'd been instrumental in drafting Cassandra's prenuptial agreement. They've done what? Vanessa's normally composed voice rose in disbelief after I explained the situation. You heard me. I've been uninvited to the wedding I'm financing. That's Eleanor. Something isn't right here. The Cassandra I know wouldn't do this, not without significant pressure. My thoughts exactly. What do you want to do? We could stop payment on the vendors, though at this late date, you'd likely lose most of your deposits. I considered this for a moment. The tactical part of me wanted to pull all financial support immediately. Why fund an event I wasn't permitted to attend? But another part, the mother who still remembered Cassandra's face when she first tried on her wedding dress, couldn't bring myself to ruin her day, regardless of what was happening between us. No, I said finally. Let the payment stand for now, but I want you to do something else for me. Name it. Remember those additional clauses we included in the prenup? I want to make sure they're ironclad, particularly the ones regarding financial transparency and the requirements for regular verification. Vanessa was silent for a moment. You're thinking Richard is after Cassandra's inheritance. I'm thinking, I don't know what he's after, but something isn't adding up. My daughter doesn't suddenly exclude me from her wedding without extreme influence. The prenup is solid, Eleanor. I personally made sure of it, but I'll review it again and reinforce anything that might have wiggle room. After finishing with Vanessa, I found myself pacing the living room, the way I used to pace the operations tent before a difficult mission. The wall beside me held photographs chronicling my family's history. James and me in our uniforms on our wedding day. Michael and Cassandra as toddlers playing in the yard of our first home. Cassandra graduating from medical school, her face alight with pride as I pinned her newly earned caduceus to her white coat. How had we gone from that moment to To this? I stopped at a more recent photo, taken at Cassandra's 32nd birthday dinner just before she met Richard. In it, she was laughing, her head thrown back, eyes crinkled with joy. It had been nearly a year since I'd seen her laugh like that. My phone rang, startling me from my thoughts. The caller ID showed Margaret Wilson, my closest friend, and the person who'd been by my side through James's death and the difficult years that followed. "I just got off the phone with Michael," Margaret said without preamble. "Tell me this isn't happening." "It is. I've got the legal notice to prove it. This has Richard written all over it." "That man is bad news, Ellie. I've been saying it since Cassandra brought him to your 4th of July barbecue last year. Remember how he kept interrupting her?" I did remember. Richard had a habit of placing his hand on Cassandra's arm whenever she spoke for too long, a subtle but effective way of silencing her. "I should have been more vocal about my concerns," I admitted. "And then what?" Pushed her straight into his arms? "You did the right thing by giving her space to make her own decisions. You couldn't have known it would come to this." "But I should have known," I thought but didn't say. My entire career, first in the military and then in security consulting, had been built on my ability to assess risks and identify threats. How had I failed so completely when it came to my own daughter? "What's your next move?" Margaret asked, knowing me well enough to understand I wouldn't simply accept the situation. "I'm letting the wedding proceed. All the arrangements stay in place." "You're still paying for everything?" The surprise in her voice was evident. "Yes, and I'm going to respect Cassandra's wishes. I won't attend the ceremony or attempt to contact her until she reaches out, but I'm also going to compile everything I know about Richard Blackwood. Background check, among other things. During my years building my security firm, I developed connections with people who specialized in discreet information gathering. It wasn't something I'd ever thought I'd use in my personal life, but these weren't normal circumstances. Need any help? George still has contacts in financial investigations. Margaret's husband had retired from the FBI's white-collar crime division 3 years earlier. That might be useful, actually. One of the things that's always bothered me about Richard is how vague he is about his investment business. He talks about clients and portfolios, but I've never been able to pin down exactly what he does or who he works with. Consider it done. George has been itching for something to occupy his mind anyway. After ending the call with Margaret, I made myself another cup of coffee and took it to my home office. The room was spartanly furnished. A desk, ergonomic chair, filing cabinet, and a single bookshelf. The only personal touches were a framed American flag that had draped James's coffin and my framed military commendations hanging on the wall. I sat down at my computer and opened a new document, titling it Richard Blackwood, Assessment. For the next hour, I methodically listed everything I knew about the man. His claimed background, private school education, Wharton MBA, 5 years at a prestigious investment firm before starting his own boutique financial advisory business. His observable behaviors and interactions with Cassandra, the inconsistencies I'd noticed in his stories, the gradual changes in my daughter since their relationship began. When viewed together, the pattern was disturbing. Cassandra had always been confident, independent, and outspoken, qualities I'd nurtured in her, knowing the world wasn't always kind to strong women. Over the 18 months she'd been with Richard, those traits had been systematically diminished. She spoke less at family gatherings, deferred to him on matters she used to take charge of, and had even started dressing differently, more conservatively, in styles that he preferred. Classic isolation and control tactics. I'd seen it before, with friends and colleagues, but somehow I'd normalized it when it came to my own daughter. My phone pinged with a text from Vanessa. Reviewed the prenup. All clauses intact and enforceable. The financial transparency requirements are particularly robust. If he's hiding anything, the quarterly disclosure requirements will smoke it out. At least I'd done one thing right. The prenuptial agreement had been thorough, extending beyond the usual asset protection to include requirements for ongoing financial transparency from both parties. Richard would be required to provide detailed statements of his business activities and personal finances every 3 months. Any significant discrepancies or attempts to hide assets would trigger penalties, including the potential invalidation of the agreement's protection of his assets in case of divorce. I was adding Vanessa's confirmation to my notes when my doorbell rang. Looking at the security camera feed on my phone, I was surprised to see Michael standing on my porch, his expression troubled. I hadn't expected him to drive over. He lived nearly an hour away. I opened the door, and my son immediately pulled me into a hug. At 34, he towered over me, his 6'2" frame inherited from his father. "I should have pushed back harder against this insanity," he said as he followed me into the kitchen. "You did the right thing. Cassandra needs you as an ally right now, not another person she feels is against her." Michael ran a hand through his hair, a gesture so like his father's that it made my heart ache. "I went to her place after I called you. Richard was there, monitoring her like some kind of prison guard. When I tried to talk to Cass alone, he insisted on staying, said they have no secrets from each other." A chill ran through me. "How did Cassandra seem?" "Subdued, robotic almost. She kept saying how much happier she'd be without you there to judge their relationship. But her eyes, Mom, they didn't match her words. She looked trapped." Michael paced my kitchen, tension visible in every line of his body. "I don't think she actually wants to exclude you, Mom. This feels like Richard's doing. He's been working on her for months, subtly turning every concern you've ever expressed about him into some kind of attack against their relationship." I nodded, pouring us both fresh coffee. This matched the pattern I'd observed: Richard's careful manipulation, positioning himself as the victim of my unwarranted suspicion. Classic tactics meant to drive a wedge between Cassandra and anyone who might question his influence over her. "What bothers me most," Michael continued, accepting the mug I handed him, "is how he's always there, watching her. When she started, talking about the wedding yesterday, mentioning how much time you two had spent planning it, he gave her this look, just for a second, and she immediately changed course, started saying how controlling you are." "Controlling?" I repeated, unable to keep the hurt from my voice. I'd always been careful to give Cassandra space to make her own choices, even when I disagreed with them. My own mother had micromanaged every aspect of my life until I'd enlisted against her wishes at 18. I'd vowed never to repeat that pattern with my children. I know it's not true. That's Richard projecting. But Cass is repeating his words like they're gospel. Michael sat heavily at the kitchen table. "There's more, Mom. Cassandra mentioned she's changing her will next week, removing you as her healthcare proxy and power of attorney." The implications hit me like a physical blow. As a surgeon, Cassandra had always been meticulous about her legal preparations. We'd discussed at length her desire to avoid extraordinary measures if she were ever incapacitated. She'd trusted me to honor those wishes. For her to transfer that responsibility, likely to Richard, was deeply concerning. "This is moving beyond emotional manipulation," I said quietly. "Michael, I think Cassandra may be in real danger." He looked up sharply. "You think Richard would hurt her physically?" "Not necessarily physically, at least not yet. But financially, psychologically. He's systematically cutting her off from anyone who might spot the red flags or challenge his narrative." Michael nodded grimly. "I picked up on something else yesterday. When I asked Cassandra about their honeymoon plans, Richard answered for her. Said they might invest the money instead. That taking 2 weeks off from work wasn't financially prudent right now. But Cass has been saving for a trip to New Zealand for years. It's been her dream." Another warning sign: controlling a partner's access to money, even money they've earned themselves, was a common tactic in abusive relationships. I'd seen it countless times during my military service. spouses of fellow soldiers gradually losing financial independence until they felt trapped. "Do you think she's still planning to keep her job after the wedding?" I asked. Michael's frown deepened. Richards made comments about her hours being incompatible with starting a family. Said no wife of his would leave their children with nannies. You know how dedicated Cassandra is to her pediatric patients. She's worked her entire adult life to reach her position. But yesterday she mentioned taking an extended leave after the wedding. It didn't sound like her at all. I moved to the window, looking out at my carefully tended garden. The rose bushes James and I had planted 20 years ago were in their autumn bloom, sturdy despite the changing season. James would have known how to handle this situation. He'd always had a gift for reaching Cassandra when she was at her most defiant or withdrawn. "I need to see the full picture before deciding how to proceed," I said finally. "If I confront Richard directly or try to force Cassandra to listen to my concerns, it will only push her further away. For now, we document everything and work behind the scenes." "What exactly are you planning?" Michael asked, a note of concern in his voice. "Nothing illegal," I assured him. "Just due diligence. The kind I should have done before Richard ever got this far with Cassandra." After Michael left, promising to keep me updated on Cassandra's behavior, I set up a secure communication channel between us using an encrypted messaging app my company had developed. Then I contacted 3 trusted associates from my security firm, explaining the situation in clinical terms, careful to frame it as a potential threat assessment rather than a personal vendetta. By evening, I had a preliminary report on Richard Blackwood. The surface details matched what he'd told us: prestigious education, successful early career at Henderson Financial Group. But beneath that veneer, troubling inconsistencies emerged. He had indeed worked at Henderson, but had left under circumstances that weren't entirely clear. His boutique financial advisory business had been incorporated 3 years ago, but showed minimal activity through official channels. Most concerning, he had changed his name 8 years earlier, from Richard Blackwell to Richard Blackwood, a detail he had never mentioned to our family. I was still processing this information when my phone rang again. It was Vanessa. "Eleanor, I found something you need to see. It's about the venue for Cassandra's wedding." "What about it?" The Westfield estate was a historic mansion with manicured gardens, a location Cassandra had fallen in love with the moment. We toured it. I'd paid the substantial deposit immediately to secure it for her October wedding date. The reservation has been changed. The wedding is still happening at Westfield, but the date has been moved up to next Saturday. My blood ran cold. That's impossible. The invitations went out months ago for the October date. According to the venue manager, Richard called personally last week to change it, paid a considerable change fee in cash. New. Invitations have already been sent to a revised guest list. A revised list that doesn't include me, I said, pieces falling into place. Vanessa, who authorized this change? I'm the one who signed the contract with Westfield. Richard told them he was acting as Cassandra's representative. He had a copy of your check and a letter supposedly from you, authorizing him to make changes on your behalf. Forgery. The situation was escalating beyond what I'd feared. Can you send me a copy of that letter? Already on its way to your email. Eleanor, if he's willing to commit fraud to expedite this wedding, what else might he be planning? That question haunted me as I ended the call. Opening my email, I found the scanned letter Vanessa had sent. The signature at the bottom was a reasonable approximation of my own, close enough to fool someone who didn't know me well. The letterhead was from my company, likely scanned and repurposed from correspondence I'd sent regarding payment for the venue. I forwarded the document to my head of digital forensics with an urgent request to analyze it. Then I pulled up the prenuptial agreement on my computer, reviewing each clause with new understanding of what might be at stake. The document had been crafted with my usual thoroughness. Beyond protecting my assets and Cassandra's inheritance, it established a framework for financial transparency throughout the marriage. Both parties were required to disclose all assets before marriage and maintain separate accounting of premarital property. Any attempt to hide assets or misrepresent financial status would result in penalties, including the forfeiture of community property rights. But the most important clause, the one I'd insisted on despite Richard's objections, was Section 12. The requirement for quarterly financial disclosures and independent verification. Every 3 months, each spouse would submit complete financial statements to an independent auditor. The first audit would occur 30 days after the wedding, with no exceptions. If Richard was accelerating the wedding timeline, he would also be accelerating this first audit. What was he trying to accomplish with such urgency? My phone pinged with a message from George Wilson, Margaret's husband. Found something interesting in county records. Blackwood purchased property last month under an LLC. 1.2 matters. Cash transaction. No mortgage. Does his business generate that kind of liquidity? Not according to the preliminary investigation my team had conducted. Richard's legitimate business activities couldn't explain that level of cash on hand. I replied, "Need to know. Source of funds. Can you dig deeper?" My doorbell rang again. This time, the security camera showed Margaret herself, holding what appeared to be a bottle of wine and a bag of takeout. I let her in, grateful for the distraction from my spiraling concerns. "I brought reinforcements," she said, holding up a bottle of the Kentucky bourbon we'd discovered together during a girls' weekend years ago. "Chinese food and liquid courage. Figured you could use both." We settled in my living room, Margaret pouring us each 2 fingers of bourbon while I laid out containers of food on the coffee table. Despite the circumstances, the familiar routine was comforting. Margaret and I had shared countless meals like this after James died, when getting through the day had felt like an insurmountable challenge. "George found a recent property purchase," I told her, taking a grateful sip of bourbon. "Paid in cash, hidden under an LLC. And now I learn Richard has secretly moved up the wedding date to next weekend." Margaret's fork paused halfway to her mouth. "Next weekend? That's incredibly suspicious. Why the rush?" "That's what I need to figure out." I showed her the forged authorization letter. "He's gone to considerable lengths to keep me in the dark about the date change. The question is why? Have you told Michael about the new date?" I shook my head. "Not yet. I wanted more information first." Margaret set down her bourbon, her expression serious. "Ellie, I've been supportive of your methodical approach so far, but this is escalating quickly. If he's willing to commit forgery and rush this wedding in secret, your daughter could be in real trouble." "I know," I admitted, the fear I'd been suppressing rising to the surface. "But if I confront Cassandra directly, Richard will use it to reinforce his narrative that I'm trying to control her or sabotage their relationship. I need concrete evidence of what he's planning." "And what exactly do you suspect he's planning?" I considered the question carefully. Best case scenario? He's rushing the wedding to gain access to Cassandra's inheritance sooner rather than later. Worst case, he's involved in something illegal, possibly using Cassandra and her reputation as a respected surgeon as cover. Margaret nodded slowly. The name change, the cash property purchase, the vague business dealings, it all points to someone with something to hide. The prenup might be our best protection at this point. The quarterly audit requirement would expose any financial irregularities, assuming Richard goes through with it. Unless he finds a way around it, Margaret pointed out. Men like him usually have contingency plans. My phone chimed with another message, this time from my head of digital forensics. Letter definitely forged. Signature digitally inserted from another document. Appears to be from the original venue contract you signed. It gets worse, I told Margaret, showing her the message. He used my original signature from the venue contract, which means he has access to documents you've signed. Has Cassandra been bringing paperwork home from your office? I tried to remember. Cassandra occasionally stopped by my office on her way home from the hospital. usually just to chat or have lunch. Had she been gathering information for Richard? The thought made my stomach twist. I don't know, I admitted. But it's possible. Margaret reached across the table, squeezing my hand. You can't keep operating in the shadows, Ellie. Not with the wedding apparently happening in just a few days. You need to take more direct action. What would you suggest? Storming into Cassandra's home, accusing her fiancé of being a con man. She'd never believe me without proof. Then get proof. Fast. You've got resources most parents in your situation wouldn't have. Use them. She was right. I'd been holding back, conscious of the ethical boundaries of using my company's capabilities for personal matters. But with forgery already documented and the wedding date secretly changed, the situation demanded more aggressive measures. I'll call in some favors, I said decisively. Full background investigation, financial trace, digital surveillance, everything we'd do for a high-risk security threat. Margaret nodded approvingly. That's the Ellie Winters I know, the one who cleared minefields in Bosnia and built a security empire from scratch. Time to channel that woman again. After Margaret left, I made a series of calls to trusted colleagues, explaining the urgency of the situation. By midnight, Operation Bridal Veil was in motion, a comprehensive investigation into Richard Blackwood's past, present, and possible future intentions. I tried to sleep, but found myself instead at my computer at 3 a.m., reviewing everything we'd gathered so far. The pieces were starting to form a pattern, though significant gaps remained. Richard had changed his name around the same time he'd left Henderson Financial Group. His business appeared to be more facade than substance, with minimal legitimate transactions but substantial unexplained income. The property purchase George had uncovered was just one of several assets concealed under various corporate entities. Most concerning was his apparent rush to marry Cassandra. What was driving that timeline? What changed to make him accelerate? His plans? My phone rang, startling me. Calls at 3:17 a.m. were never good news. The screen showed it was Marcus Johnson, my company's chief investigator and a former military intelligence officer. We have a situation, he said without preamble. A contact at Treasury flagged something. Richard Blackwood's name has appeared in an ongoing investigation into money laundering through real estate transactions. Nothing concrete enough for charges yet, but he's on their radar. My heart sank. This was worse than I'd imagined. Any details on the investigation? Limited. It appears to involve foreign funds moving through a series of shell companies, ultimately being used to purchase U.S. properties. The property George identified fits the pattern. Is Cassandra's name connected to any of this? Not yet, but if they marry and she becomes joint owner of these properties or signatory on his accounts, she could be implicated, I finished, the implications crystal clear. Richard wasn't just after Cassandra's money. He was setting her up to be a potential fall person if his schemes collapsed. Her reputation as a respected surgeon would provide perfect cover for suspicious financial activities. Who would question a successful doctor investing in real estate? There's more, Marcus continued. The prenuptial agreement you had drawn up, the quarterly audit requirement would almost certainly expose these transactions. If Richard's aware of active investigations, he might be accelerating the timeline to either complete certain transactions before the first audit or to find a way to nullify the prenup entirely. How would he nullify it? Both parties signed voluntarily with separate legal representation. There are always loopholes, claiming coercion, finding technical errors in the filing, or more direct methods. A chill ran through me. What are you suggesting? I'm not suggesting anything specific. Just noting that people involved in these kinds of financial schemes rarely allow legal documents to stand in their way. Be careful, Eleanor. This isn't just about protecting your daughter's inheritance anymore. This could be about protecting her freedom, or worse. I spent the rest of the night in my home office, coordinating with my team as information poured in. By dawn, We had assembled a troubling portrait of Richard Blackwood, or Richard Blackwell, as he had been known before. 8 years ago, while working at Henderson Financial Group, Richard had been quietly pushed out following an internal investigation into irregular client account activities. Nothing had been proven conclusively enough for criminal charges, but Henderson had paid settlements to several clients who had reported unauthorized transactions. The firm had kept the matter quiet to avoid publicity, and Richard had changed his name shortly afterward, effectively burying the incident. In the years since, he had cultivated a careful public image as a successful financial advisor while operating a network of shell companies through which millions of dollars flowed. The source of these funds remained unclear, though Marcus's treasury contact suggested connections to Eastern European investment groups with questionable legitimacy. Most alarmingly, 3 women before Cassandra had been briefly engaged to Richard. All 3 had broken off their engagements under circumstances they refused to discuss. One had moved across the country afterward. Another had taken out a restraining order that was later dropped. The third had withdrawn substantial sums from her accounts before disappearing entirely from social media and public records. A pattern was emerging that made my military instincts scream with warning. Richard wasn't just a con man after Cassandra's money. He was dangerous. My phone rang at 6:17 a.m. It was Michael, his voice tense with urgency. "Mom, I just got a text from Cassandra. She asked me to come to breakfast at her place this morning to discuss my role in the wedding. She mentioned the date. It's this Saturday. So she knows about the date change," I said, processing this new information. "Apparently. But why wouldn't she have told me until now? I'm supposed to walk her down the aisle, for God's sake. Richard probably convinced her that keeping the new date quiet was necessary to prevent me from interfering. Did you respond to her?" "Yes. I said I'd be there at 8. Should I mention that I know you've been uninvited?" I considered the question carefully. "No. Act surprised when she tells you. We need to understand what she believes is happening. And Michael, be very careful what you say. If Richard suspects you're allied with me, he'll cut you off too. Then Cassandra will have no one left in her corner." "Understood. I'll call you. After breakfast." After hanging up, I moved to my kitchen to make coffee, my mind racing with possible scenarios. If Cassandra knew about the date change and hadn't told Michael until now, what else might she be keeping from him? Was she fully complicit in Richard's schemes, or was she being manipulated, unaware of the danger she was in? My security system chimed, alerting me to movement at my front door. Checking the camera feed, I was stunned to see Cassandra herself standing on my porch, alone and looking uncertain. I hadn't expected to see her again before the wedding, if at all. I took a deep breath to steady myself before opening the door. My daughter stood there, looking smaller somehow than I remembered, dressed in a conservative beige sweater and dark slacks that weren't her usual style. Her hair was pulled back, severely, highlighting the shadows under her eyes and the tension in her face. "Cassandra?" I said, keeping my voice neutral despite the surge of emotions threatening to overwhelm me. "Mom!" Her voice was strained, formal. "I know my letter said not to contact me, but I felt I should explain in person. May I come in?" I stepped aside, letting her enter. She walked stiffly to the kitchen, her movements lacking their usual confidence. When she turned to face me, her expression was a careful mask. "I came to return this," she said, placing an envelope on the counter between us. "The certified check you gave me for the wedding. Since you won't be attending, it wouldn't be right to keep it." I made no move to take the envelope. "I gave that to you to create your dream wedding. My attendance wasn't a condition." She blinked, clearly not expecting this response. Richard says many things, it seems, including that I've been undermining your relationship." Her eyes widened slightly before she caught herself. You've never approved of him." "I expressed concerns once, Cassandra. Once. After that, I supported your choice because I trust your judgment." I kept my tone gentle, non-confrontational. But recently, I've wondered whether you're being allowed to exercise that judgment. A flicker of something, recognition, fear, crossed her face before she stiffened. Richard respects me. He values my opinion. Does he? Then why change your wedding date without consulting me, the person paying for it? Why forge my signature on venue documents? Her composure slipped for a moment. He didn't... That's not... She stopped, recalibrating. The date change was necessary. October was too far away. Why? Because... She hesitated, searching for an explanation. Because we're ready to start our lives together now. Why wait? I studied my daughter, the surgeon who had graduated top run of her class, the woman who typically planned everything with meticulous care. This impulsive decision didn't align with the Cassandra I knew. What about your honeymoon to New Zealand? The one you've been planning for years? Another flicker of confusion. We decided that's not practical right now. Richard thinks it's better to invest that money. And you agree? She looked away. New Zealand will always be there. We can go another time. I moved closer, careful not to crowd her. Cassandra, in the past 18 months, you've gradually stopped doing things you love. You've distanced yourself from lifelong friends. You're considering leaving the surgical career you worked so hard to build. And now you're uninviting me from your wedding and accelerating the date. Can you understand why I'm concerned? Her eyes met mine briefly before darting away. You're making normal relationship compromises sound sinister. Am I? What about changing your healthcare proxy and power of attorney? Is that a normal compromise too? She stiffened. How did you... Michael shouldn't have told you that. It's my decision. Of course it is. But it's a significant change from what you've always wanted. You were adamant about your end-of-life wishes and trusted me to honor them. What changed? Richard is going to be my husband. It makes sense for him to make those decisions now. I took a careful breath. Cassandra, do you remember what you told me after your first year of residency? After you lost that young patient despite doing everything right? She flinched slightly but remained silent. You said you never wanted extraordinary measures if there was no meaningful chance of recovery. You made me promise to fight the hospital if necessary to let you go peacefully. You were so clear about not wanting to be kept alive by machines. Does Richard know those wishes? He knows what's best for me, she replied, but her voice had lost conviction. Has he asked you to sign any other documents recently? Anything related to your finances or your practice? Her eyes widened before she could control her reaction. That's none of your business. So there were other documents. Richard was moving, faster than I'd realized. Cassandra, I've never tried to control your life. Even when I disagreed with your choices, I've respected them. All I'm asking now is that you consider whether your recent decisions truly reflect what you want, or what Richard wants for you. She stood abruptly. I knew coming here was a mistake. Richard was right. You'll never support us. I want to support you, Cassandra. That's all I've ever wanted. But I'm worried about what's happening. The rushed wedding, the forged documents, the sudden changes in your plans and priorities. These aren't trivial concerns. You investigate people for a living, Mom. You see threats everywhere. Not everyone is hiding something. The irony of her statement was painful, given what we'd uncovered about Richard's past. But confronting her with that information now would only drive her further away. You're right. My work has made me cautious. But it's also taught me to recognize certain patterns. The way Richard has systematically isolated you from people who care about you follows a pattern I've seen before, and it never leads anywhere good. For just a moment, I thought I saw doubt in her eyes. But then she squared her shoulders, retreating, behind the wall Richard had built around her. I'm getting married on Saturday, Mom. Richard thought a smaller, more intimate ceremony would be better for us. If you really support me, you'll respect our decision to keep it private. Does private mean excluding the mother who raised you alone after your father died? The person who supported every dream you've ever had? She flinched but held firm. It means including only those who genuinely support our relationship. I should go. Michael's expecting me for breakfast. I didn't try to stop her as she walked to the door. But before she opened it, I said quietly, "Whatever happens, Cassandra, I'm here for you. If you ever need anything at all, I'm a phone call away. No questions asked." She paused, her back to me, hand on the doorknob. For a long moment, she stood frozen, as if warring with herself. Then, barely audible, she whispered, "The prenup. Make sure it stands." Before I could respond, she was gone, the door closing firmly behind her. I stood motionless, processing her parting words. Make sure it stands. Was that a warning? A plea for help? Whatever it meant, it confirmed my suspicions that Richard was planning to circumvent the prenuptial agreement somehow. My phone rang. Marcus again. "We've got movement on Richard's accounts," he reported. "Large transfers happening this morning. Funds consolidating from his shell companies into a single offshore account. He's preparing for something." "He's preparing to run," I said, the pieces falling into place. "The wedding is Saturday. If he can convince Cassandra to nullify or circumvent the prenup, he could potentially access her accounts immediately afterward. With the quarterly audit requirement eliminated, he could drain everything and disappear before anyone realizes what's happening." How would he nullify the prenup at this stage? Both parties signed with separate counsel present. "I don't know yet, but Cassandra just told me to make sure it stands. She knows something is wrong, even if she can't admit it consciously. I'll have the team monitor all of Richard's communications and movements. If he's planning to run, we'll see signs." After hanging up, I messaged Michael. "Just had an unexpected visit from Cassandra. Be extra careful at breakfast. Richard is accelerating his plans. Call me immediately afterward." My next call was to Vanessa. "I need to know every possible way a prenuptial agreement can be invalidated after signing but before consummation of the marriage." "There aren't many," she replied. "Proving it was signed under duress or coercion. Demonstrating that full financial disclosure wasn't provided. Finding a technical error in the filing or execution. But you were meticulous with Cassandra's agreement, and we have documentation of every step. What's going on?" I explained my concerns about Richard's plans and Cassandra's cryptic parting comment. "There is one other possibility," Vanessa said hesitantly. "If one party can prove the other concealed assets or misrepresented their financial situation during the prenup negotiations, they can petition to have it set aside. Is there anything in your financial records Richard could twist to suggest you weren't fully forthcoming?" I thought carefully. "No. My financial disclosures were complete. Every account, every property, every investment, it's all documented. Then he might be planning to claim duress, that you forced Cassandra to sign, against her will by threatening to withhold support for the wedding or threatening her inheritance. But that's not true. She had her own attorney review everything. Truth doesn't always matter in these situations, Eleanor. If she backs his story now, claiming she only recently found the courage to stand up to your manipulation, it creates reasonable doubt, especially if they can find a sympathetic judge." A cold realization settled over me. That's why he's been positioning me as controlling, building a narrative that I've been manipulating Cassandra all along. The uninvitation isn't just about keeping me away from the wedding, it's part of establishing that narrative. Exactly. And with the wedding now just days away, he's not leaving you much time to counter that strategy. My doorbell rang again. This time, the security feed showed Margaret, her expression urgent. "I have to go," I told Vanessa. "Keep thinking about ways to protect the prenup." When I opened the door, Margaret didn't wait for an invitation before rushing inside. "George just called. His treasury contact came through with more information, and it's bad, Ellie. Really bad." "What did they find?" "Richard isn't just laundering money. He's facilitating transactions for people on watch lists, the kind of people who don't accept failure or loose ends. I felt the blood drain from my face. Are you saying if his plans fall apart, Cassandra becomes a liability? Yes. Margaret gripped my arm. This isn't just about money anymore. If Richard is cornered or exposed, Cassandra could be in physical danger. My military training kicked into high gear, mind already shifting to tactical planning. We need to get her away from him immediately, before the wedding. How? She's not listening to you? She just returned the check for her wedding. She came here? Yes, about 30 minutes ago. She seemed conflicted. Before she left, she gave me a message. Make sure the prenup stands. I think on some level, she knows. Something is wrong. Margaret sat heavily on my couch. So what's the plan? First, we need to understand exactly what Richard is planning. If he's moving money now, he must have a specific timeline. The wedding is Saturday, just 4 days away. I'm betting he plans to act immediately after. What can I do to help? Contact George. See if his treasury connections can put a temporary freeze on Richard's transactions without alerting him. That might buy us some time. I moved to my desk, pulling out a secure laptop used for company operations. Meanwhile, I need to review everything we've gathered and identify Richard's most likely escape route. If he's planning to run after the wedding, he'll have transportation arranged, documents prepared. Margaret nodded, already pulling out her phone. And Michael? What's his role in this? For now, intelligence gathering. He's having breakfast with Cassandra as we speak. I've warned him to be careful, but he needs to maintain his position as her trusted confidant. If we lose that, she'll have no one. As Margaret spoke quietly with George, I opened the secure communication channel with my team, reviewing their latest findings. Richard had booked 2 first-class tickets to Bali, departing Sunday morning, the day after the wedding. The tickets were in his and Cassandra's names, but he had also obtained a separate ticket to Dubai under an alias we hadn't previously connected to him, departing late Saturday night. He wasn't planning a honeymoon. He was setting up an alibi while preparing his actual escape. A cold, focused clarity descended over me, the same mental state I'd entered before leading high-risk missions in war zones. The stakes couldn't be higher. My daughter's safety, her future, possibly her life. Failure wasn't an option. My phone rang. Michael. Mom, I've just left Cassandra's place. You were right. Richard is up to something big. While he was in the shower, Cassandra showed me documents he wants her to sign after the wedding. One terminates the prenup entirely, claiming it was signed under duress. Another adds her as a signatory to accounts I've never heard of. She seemed confused, said Richard told her it was standard practice for married couples. Did she indicate she plans to sign them? She said she trusts Richard's financial expertise, but she seemed anxious. When I questioned why they were rushing the wedding, she gave rehearsed answers that didn't sound like her at all. Then Richard came back and she completely shut down. Michael, this is worse than we thought. Margaret just arrived with information from George's treasury contact. The people Richard is involved with are dangerous. We need to get Cassandra away from him immediately. How? She won't leave willingly. She's completely under his influence. I closed my eyes, considering our limited options. We need to make Richard show his true colors in a way Cassandra can't deny, and we need to do it before Saturday. The next 48 hours passed in a blur of activity as my team and I worked to unravel Richard's scheme and develop a plan to protect Cassandra. Sleep became a luxury I couldn't afford, surviving instead on military-grade caffeine and the razor-sharp focus that crisis had always brought out in me. By Thursday morning, just 2 days before the wedding, we had managed to piece together most of Richard's plan. The picture was more disturbing than I'd initially feared. Richard had been operating what amounted to a sophisticated Ponzi scheme, using investments from new clients to pay returns to previous ones while siphoning millions into offshore accounts. His legitimate business front was crumbling as investors began asking questions about their returns, and at least 2 had filed complaints with regulatory authorities. It was only a matter of time before the whole house of cards collapsed. That explained the rushed wedding timeline. Richard needed access to Cassandra's considerable assets, not just her inheritance from me, but her own substantial savings and retirement accounts, to either shore up his faltering scheme or fund his escape. Most likely the latter, given the ticket to Dubai we'd discovered. According to Michael, who had maintained daily contact with Cassandra under the guise of wedding preparations, Richard had become increasingly controlling, barely letting her out of his sight. He monitored her phone calls, accompanied her to work, and had convinced her to take a leave of absence from the hospital immediately following the wedding. "He's planning to isolate her completely," Michael reported during our morning briefing. "Once they're married, he'll have legal authority to access her finances, especially if he can get her to sign those additional documents nullifying the prenup." Marcus nodded grimly. The timeline fits. Wedding on Saturday, flight to Dubai that night. If he can get her to transfer funds before he leaves, he disappears with millions while she's left holding the bag for his financial crimes. "What about the Bali tickets?" Margaret asked. She had temporarily moved into my guest room, refusing to leave me alone during this crisis. "Misdirection," I explained. "He'll tell Cassandra they're going to Bali for their honeymoon, but he'll never board that flight. Once he's safely in Dubai, he'll likely contact her with some emergency story about why he had to leave early and ask her to transfer more funds." Vanessa, who had joined our makeshift command center set up in my living room, tapped her pen against her legal pad. "The good news is, the prenup is solid. I've been through it line by line with 2 other attorneys. Even if Richard tries to challenge, it's based on duress. The documentation of the negotiation process is too thorough. The bad news is, if Cassandra willingly signs new documents after the wedding, those could supersede certain provisions." "That's assuming Richard actually goes through with the wedding legally," Marcus pointed out. "We found evidence he obtained false identity documents recently. He could potentially use those to create a marriage that appears legitimate to Cassandra, but wouldn't hold up to legal scrutiny." "Why would he do that?" Michael asked, confused. "Because a legally invalid marriage would mean the prenup never takes effect," Vanessa explained. "But Cassandra wouldn't know that. He could convince her they're legally married, get her to sign authorizations for her accounts, drain them, and disappear, all while avoiding the constraints of the prenuptial agreement." The implications were staggering. Richard wasn't just planning to steal Cassandra's money, he was setting her up to take the fall for his financial crimes while leaving her with no legal protections. "We need to stop this wedding," I said firmly. "Or at the very least, ensure it's not legally valid if it does occur." "How?" Margaret asked. "Cassandra won't listen to you, and if we go to the authorities with what we know, there's no guarantee they'll act in time. Financial crimes investigations can take months. We don't have months. We have less than 48 hours. I stood up, pacing the room as I considered our options. We need to hit Richard where he's vulnerable while protecting Cassandra. If we can freeze his assets or trigger an investigation into his businesses before Saturday, he might run without her. That would break her heart, Michael said quietly. Better heartbroken than financially ruined and potentially facing criminal charges for his actions, I countered. Or worse, Marcus's phone buzzed. He checked it, his expression darkening. My Treasury contact says they can't move on Richard without more concrete evidence of illegal activity. They're building a case, but they're at least weeks away from action. Then we'll have to create our own leverage, I decided. 22 years in the military and another decade running a security consulting firm had taught me that sometimes conventional approaches fail. When they do, you adapt. What exactly are you suggesting? Vanessa asked cautiously. Nothing illegal, I assured her. Just unconventional. Richard is a con man. The way to beat a con man is to run a better con. I outlined my plan. It was risky and depended on several factors aligning perfectly, but it was our best chance to protect Cassandra without driving her further into Richard's control. The first phase began that afternoon when George, using his FBI connections, arranged for a very official-looking financial crimes investigator to coincidentally encounter Richard at his office building. The investigator made no direct accusations, but asked pointed questions about certain transactions and mentioned an ongoing investigation into several investment schemes involving Eastern European funds. Marcus's surveillance team reported that Richard left the meeting visibly shaken. He immediately made 3 encrypted calls from a burner phone we hadn't previously known about, then began moving money between accounts with greater urgency. "He's spooked," Marcus confirmed, "but not enough to abandon his plans. If anything, he's accelerating his timeline." Phase 2 involved Michael. During dinner with Cassandra and Richard that evening, ostensibly to discuss final wedding details, he carefully planted seeds of doubt without directly challenging Richard. "I was surprised to hear you're thinking of leaving your surgical practice," Michael mentioned casually to Cassandra. "Dad would have been so proud of everything you've accomplished. Remember how he used to tell everyone his daughter was going to be a world-class surgeon?" Cassandra's eyes misted slightly at the mention of our late husband. "It's just a leave of absence," she said, though her tone lacked conviction. "Of course," Richard interjected smoothly. "Cassandra deserves a break after working so hard. Once we're settled, she can decide what she wants." "I thought the plan was for her to take a full year off," Michael said innocently. "That's what you mentioned at lunch last week, right, Richard?" Richard's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "We're keeping our options open." Throughout the meal, Michael continued this approach, subtly highlighting discrepancies in Richard's statements or reminding Cassandra of goals and values she'd held before meeting him. According to Michael, Richard grew increasingly agitated while Cassandra became quieter, more thoughtful. "I think it's working," Michael reported afterward. "She's starting to notice the inconsistencies herself. And when I mentioned Mom's health scare last year, the one where Cassandra insisted on reviewing all the treatment options personally, I saw real conflict in her eyes. She remembers how important her medical authority was then. The health scare had been minor, elevated blood pressure that had resolved with medication, but Cassandra's response had been typical of her. Thorough, professional, deeply caring. She had insisted on accompanying me to appointments, reviewing my charts, consulting with colleagues about treatment options. The woman Michael described at dinner, passively accepting Richard's decisions about her career and life, was a pale shadow of that confident doctor. "Keep up the pressure," I instructed. "But be careful. If Richard sees you as a threat, he'll cut you off from Cassandra completely." Phase 3 was the most delicate and potentially the most effective. After consulting with Vanessa about legal boundaries, I reached out to the officiating minister scheduled for Saturday's ceremony. Reverend Thomas had known our family for years. He had presided over James's funeral and had remained a spiritual advisor to Cassandra during her medical school years. "Eleanor, I was surprised not to see your name on the updated guest list," he said when I visited his office. "Cassandra explained you were having health issues and couldn't attend." Another lie Richard had constructed. "I'm in perfect health, Reverend. The truth is, I've been uninvited because I expressed concerns about Richard's character and intentions." The minister's eyebrows rose. "That doesn't sound like the Cassandra I know." "It doesn't sound like her because it isn't her, not entirely. She's being manipulated by a man with a troubling past and dangerous connections." I hesitated before continuing. "I wouldn't normally share this, but I'm genuinely concerned for Cassandra's safety. My security firm has uncovered evidence that Richard is involved in financial crimes. We believe he's rushing this wedding to gain control of Cassandra's assets before disappearing." Reverend Thomas listened gravely as I outlined what we had discovered. When I finished, he sat in silence for several moments. "What are you asking of me, Eleanor?" I can't refuse to perform a ceremony based on suspicions, even well-founded ones. I'm not asking you to refuse. I'm asking you to create a space for doubt. Before the ceremony, speak with Cassandra privately. Remind her of the values and principles she's always held dear. Ask her if she's certain this marriage aligns with those values. As her spiritual advisor, that's within your purview. And if she remains determined to proceed, I took a deep breath, then perform a ceremony that appears legitimate to all present, but contains a deliberate canonical or legal error that would render the marriage invalid until corrected. His eyes widened. That would be highly unethical. More unethical than allowing a predator to legally bind himself to a woman he intends to defraud and abandon. This isn't about stopping Cassandra from marrying someone I disapprove of. This is about buying time to protect her from serious harm. After further discussion, Reverend Thomas agreed to speak with Cassandra privately before the ceremony. He wouldn't commit to the second part of my request, but the seed had been planted. By Friday morning, 24 hours before the wedding, our plan was fully in motion. Richard was growing increasingly paranoid, checking for surveillance and making furtive calls. Through careful manipulation of information, we had created the impression that authorities were closing in on his financial schemes, without directly connecting that pressure to me or my team. Michael reported that Cassandra seemed withdrawn and uncertain, asking questions about wedding details that reflected growing doubts. When Richard wasn't present, she had even asked Michael if he thought she was rushing into marriage, the first time she had expressed any hesitation since their engagement. She's fighting her way back to the surface, Margaret observed when Michael shared this development. The real Cassandra, the strong, independent woman you raised, is still in there, trying to break through Richard's conditioning. But will she break through in time? I wondered aloud. The wedding is tomorrow. My phone rang, a number I didn't recognize. I answered cautiously. Mom? Cassandra's voice was hushed, tense. I'm using a nurse's phone at the hospital. I don't have much time. Cassandra, are you all right? I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest. She spoke rapidly, as if afraid of being interrupted. The prenuptial agreement. Did you include something about financial disclosures after the wedding? Yes. Quarterly audits of both parties' finances by an independent accountant. The first audit would occur 30 days after the wedding. She exhaled sharply. That's what I thought. Richard is trying to get me to sign a document waiving that requirement. He says it's unnecessary and shows a lack of trust. It is necessary. Cassandra. Standard for high net worth individuals, which you are. It protects both parties. A long pause. He's been different these past few days. Agitated. Secretive. He took my phone this morning, said it needed a software update. I think he's monitoring my calls. My heart raced, hope and fear warring within me. Cassandra, I'm concerned about your safety. Whatever is happening, please know you can come to me anytime. No questions asked. The wedding is tomorrow. Her voice dropped even lower. I keep feeling like I'm missing something important, like I'm not seeing the whole picture. Michael mentioned things last night that made me realize how much I've changed since being with Richard. Things I used to care about that I've just abandoned. Trust your instincts, Cassandra. They served you well throughout your medical career. If something feels wrong, it probably is. I have to go. Richard is picking me up soon. I told him I had an emergency surgery, but he's already called twice checking when I'll be done. She hesitated, then added, if something happens, if I go through with this wedding, make sure the prenup stands. Promise me. I promise. But Cassandra, the line went dead. She had hung up. I immediately called Marcus. Cassandra just reached out. She's starting to see through Richard's manipulation, but she's afraid. I think he's monitoring her movements more closely now. That matches what our surveillance shows. He's barely letting her out of his sight. And Eleanor, there's something else you should know. Our team intercepted communications suggesting Richard may have hired someone to deal with loose ends after the wedding. We can't confirm the exact nature of the threat, but he's planning to eliminate Cassandra once he has what he needs. I finished, ice forming in my veins. This wasn't just about money anymore. My daughter's life was in danger. We can't wait any longer, I decided. We need to move to the contingency plan, now. The contingency plan had been my last resort, the option I had hoped we wouldn't need to use. It was aggressive, potentially traumatic for Cassandra, and carried significant legal risks. But with evidence suggesting Richard might harm my daughter after obtaining access to her finances, the stakes were too high for half measures. "Are you sure about this?" Marcus asked, his expression grave. "Once we initiate, there's no going back." I nodded, the decision weighing heavily on me. We have no choice. If we're right about Richard's intentions, Cassandra's life is in danger. I'd rather have her angry with me than dead. Marcus nodded and made the call, activating our full security team. Within minutes, Operation Glass Slipper, our code name, for the contingency plan, was in motion. The first phase required getting Michael into position. As Cassandra's brother and the person walking her down the aisle, he would have access to her before and during the ceremony. His role was crucial. He needed to stay close to her while creating opportunities for our team to intervene. "Michael, are you clear on what needs to happen tomorrow?" I asked during our final briefing Friday evening. "Crystal clear," he confirmed. "I pick up Cassandra at 11 a.m., bring her to Westfield Estate for hair and makeup. I stay with her as much as possible, making sure she's never completely alone with Richard before the ceremony. At the first opportunity, I tell her what we've discovered. And if she doesn't believe you, I show her the evidence package Marcus prepared. If she still doesn't believe me or refuses to leave, I proceed with Plan B. Secretly activate the emergency. Signal to bring in the extraction team. Remember, your safety and Cassandra's are the priorities," I emphasized. "If Richard becomes suspicious or aggressive, don't confront him. Signal for backup immediately." Michael nodded, his jaw set with determination. "I won't let you down, Mom. Or Cassandra." The second phase of our contingency plan involved the venue itself. Under the guise of final catering arrangements, Margaret had gained access to Westfield Estate that afternoon, allowing our security team to discreetly install surveillance equipment in key locations. We now had eyes and ears throughout the property, giving us real-time awareness of all movements. More controversially, we had also arranged for 2 off-duty police officers, friends of George's from his FBI days, to be present as guests, providing legitimate law enforcement presence if things escalated. The final and most crucial phase involved me. Despite being uninvited, I would be at the wedding, not as a guest, but positioned nearby with a tactical team ready to intervene if necessary. I had no intention of disrupting Cassandra's wedding out of spite or hurt feelings. My presence was solely to ensure her safety if Richard's true intentions were revealed, and he reacted violently. As we finalized preparations, Vanessa raised the question we had all been avoiding. What if we're wrong? What if Richard is just controlling and manipulative but not actually dangerous? We could be traumatizing Cassandra and exposing ourselves to serious legal liability. "I've considered that," I admitted. "If we're wrong about the level of danger, I'll accept full responsibility for any fallout. But everything we've uncovered points to Richard planning something far worse than financial manipulation. The encrypted communications, the ticket to Dubai, the pattern with his previous fiancés. I can't ignore those warning signs." Margaret squeezed my hand supportively. "Trust your instincts, Ellie. They've saved lives before." Late that night, after everyone had left to get what rest they could before the operation, I sat alone in my living room, the weight of tomorrow's actions heavy on my shoulders. On the coffee table lay a sealed envelope addressed to Cassandra, a letter explaining Everything I had discovered about Richard and why I had taken such extreme measures to protect her. I had written it as a contingency, knowing that regardless of tomorrow's outcome, our relationship might never be the same. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Mom, it's Cassandra. Using a friend's phone. Found something in Richard's briefcase, document making him medical power of attorney, backdated to before the prenup. Already has my signature. I didn't sign it. What's happening?" My heart raced as I called the number immediately. Cassandra answered on the first ring, her voice a hushed whisper. "Where are you?" I asked urgently. "Bathroom at Richard's condo. He's asleep. I slipped in here to call you." "Cassandra, listen carefully. You need to get out of there now. Richard is not who he claims to be." "I'm starting to realize that," she replied, her voice stronger than I'd heard it in months. "I found other documents too. Forms transferring my investment accounts to joint ownership, all with signatures that look like mine but that I never signed. My military training kicked in, focusing me on the immediate extraction rather than the emotions bubbling beneath the surface. Can you leave safely without waking him?" "I think so. He took a sleeping pill about an hour ago. He's been having trouble sleeping lately. Keeps checking his phone, making calls in the middle of the night. Here's what you need to do. Leave right now. Take only your essential documents. Passport, ID, medical credentials. Don't take time to pack clothes or toiletries. Go to the parking garage, but don't take your car. He might have had it tracked. There's a 24-hour coffee shop 3 blocks east. Go there and wait inside, near the window. I'll have someone pick you up within 30 minutes. Mom, you're scaring me. What's going on? I'll explain everything when you're safe. Please, Cassandra, trust me. This is about more than control or money. I have reason to believe you might be in physical danger." A long pause, then, "Okay, I'm leaving now. Text this number when you reach the coffee shop. And Cassandra, I love you." "I love you too, Mom." The vulnerability in her voice made her sound suddenly younger, reminding me of the little girl who had once turned to me for protection from all the world's dangers. As soon as we disconnected, I called Marcus. "Cassandra's leaving Richard's condo. She found forged documents in his briefcase and reached out. She's heading to the Midnight Brew on Oakwood. I need someone there to pick her up immediately." "On it. I'll go myself with Sarah as backup." "We'll bring her to the safe house." "No, bring her here. She'll feel safer in familiar surroundings." Within 20 minutes, my phone pinged again. "At the coffee shop. Corner table by the window, wearing black hoodie." I relayed the information to Marcus, who confirmed they were 2 minutes away. The next 15 minutes were the longest of my life as I waited for confirmation that Cassandra was safely extracted. When Marcus finally called to say they were en route to my house, I felt a wave of relief so powerful my knees nearly buckled. 30 minutes later, my security system alerted me to a car entering my driveway. I watched on the monitor as Marcus's sedan pulled up, and Cassandra emerged from the back seat, looking exhausted but alert. I met her at the door, and without hesitation, she fell into my arms, her body trembling. "I've been so stupid," she whispered, against my shoulder. "So blind." "You haven't been stupid," I assured her, guiding her inside. "You've been manipulated by someone who's very skilled at it. Even I didn't see all the red flags until recently." In the living room, Marcus briefed us on the immediate security precautions they had taken: monitoring Richard's condo, notifying our contacts in law enforcement to be on alert, securing Cassandra's bank accounts against unauthorized access. "He'll realize I'm gone when he wakes up," Cassandra said, accepting the hot tea Margaret had prepared. "What happens then?" "Best case scenario, he runs," Marcus explained. "That's what we want, for him to flee without attempting to contact you. Worst case, he tries to find you, but we're prepared for that possibility." "I don't understand any of this," Cassandra said, looking between us. "Why would Richard forge my signature? What was he planning? I took a deep breath, then laid out everything we had discovered about Richard's past, his financial schemes, and his apparent plans for after the wedding. As I spoke, Cassandra's expression shifted from confusion to disbelief, and finally to cold anger. "Show me the evidence," she demanded when I finished. Marcus opened his laptop and walked her through the documentation we had compiled. Financial records showing irregular transactions, the falsified identity documents Richard had obtained, the travel arrangements to Dubai, the connections to individuals under investigation for financial crimes. Most damning of all were the communications we had intercepted regarding cleaning up loose ends after the wedding, language common in criminal circles for eliminating witnesses or liabilities. "I knew something felt wrong," Cassandra said quietly. "Especially these last few weeks. But I kept telling myself I was just nervous about the wedding. When he started rushing the timeline, changing all our plans, I rationalized it as excitement." She looked up at me, her eyes clear and focused. "The prenup. That's what protected me, isn't it? That's why he was so desperate to nullify it." Nodded. "The quarterly audit requirement would have exposed his schemes within 30 days of your wedding. He couldn't allow that to happen. And I almost signed those waiver documents." She shuddered. "If Michael hadn't mentioned your health scare, reminded me of how important medical autonomy has always been to me, I might not have started questioning things." "The important thing is that you're safe now," Margaret interjected, squeezing Cassandra's hand. "Your mom's team has been working around the clock to protect you." Cassandra looked at me, her expression unreadable. "All those times I accused you of being controlling, of not supporting my relationship, you were just trying to protect me. I should have been more direct about my concerns," I admitted. "But I was afraid of pushing you further away, of making Richard seem like the victim of my interference." "That's exactly what he did anyway," Cassandra said bitterly. "Every time you expressed even the mildest concern, he twisted it into an attack on our relationship. He'd say things like, 'Your mother never thinks anyone is good enough for you,' or 'She can't accept that you're an adult making your own choices.'" "Classic isolation tactics," Marcus observed, "turning legitimate concerns from loved ones into evidence of their supposed controlling nature." Cassandra nodded, her professional analytical mind visibly processing everything. "What happens now? Do we go to the police?" "Eventually," I said. "But first, we need to see how Richard reacts to your disappearance. If he flees, that strengthens any case against him. If he tries to find you or access your accounts, that's additional evidence of his intentions." "And the wedding? All those guests?" "Michael will handle the venue and notifications," Margaret assured her. "No one needs to know the details except that the wedding has been canceled." As we discussed next steps, my security system chimed again, this time with an alert that motion had been detected outside my property perimeter. Marcus checked the surveillance feed on his tablet. "We've got movement in the woods behind your house," he said tensely. "One individual, approaching cautiously." "Richard?" Cassandra asked, fear creeping into her voice. "Unlikely," Marcus replied. "He wouldn't know to come here yet. More likely someone he hired for surveillance. We need to move now." We had prepared for this possibility. My home had a concealed panic room, a remnant of my post-military paranoia that had proven useful more than once in my security career. Within minutes, Cassandra and Margaret were secured inside, while Marcus and I implemented defensive protocols. The intruder never made it past our perimeter sensors. Security footage showed a man in dark clothing retreating rapidly after triggering our alert system. He matched the description of a private investigator known to work for Richard's associates, likely sent to establish surveillance on my home in case Cassandra sought refuge here. "They anticipated you might come to me," I explained to Cassandra, "when we deemed it safe to emerge from the panic room. We need to move you to our secondary location immediately." "You have a secondary location?" she asked, sounding both impressed and slightly unnerved by the extent of our preparations. Mom's been running this like a military operation, Michael explained, having arrived during the security alert. Everything from surveillance to extraction protocols to safe houses. Cassandra shook her head in wonder. All because I uninvited you from my wedding. No, I corrected gently. All because I love you and recognize the danger you were in, even when you couldn't see it yourself. As dawn broke on what should have been Cassandra's wedding day, we were settled in a secure apartment owned by my security firm, used occasionally for high-risk client protection. Michael had handled notifications to the venue and key guests, citing a family emergency that necessitated postponing the wedding. Around 7 a.m., Marcus received an alert from the team monitoring Richard's condo. He's on the move, Marcus reported. Packed a single suitcase, withdrew the maximum from 3 different ATMs, and headed straight to the airport. He's making a run for it. Is he taking the Dubai flight? I asked. No, that's not until tonight. He's trying for standby on anything leaving the country. Our airport contact says he's attempting to use one of his alternative identities. Cassandra watched this exchange with a strange calmness. He's not even looking for me, is he? Just saving himself. That's actually the best outcome for your safety, I pointed out. The less interest he has in finding you, the less danger you're in. She nodded slowly. I know, it's just 18 months of my life. I thought he loved me, and the moment things go sideways, he doesn't even try to call me. Just grabs his bags and runs. I took her hand. That's because it was never about you. Cassandra, you were a means to an end. Access to money, respectability, cover for his schemes. The man you thought you loved never existed. I should feel heartbroken, she said, staring out the window at the rising sun. Instead, I just feel angry. At him for using me, at myself for not seeing it sooner. The anger is healthier than heartbreak, right now, Margaret observed. It will help you stay clear-headed while we resolve this situation. By mid-morning, we had confirmation that Richard had managed to board a flight to Mexico City, a common first stop for those planning to disappear. Internationally, our law enforcement contacts had been notified, but as Marcus grimly noted, once Richard made connections to countries with limited extradition agreements, apprehending him would become significantly more challenging. The important thing is that he's gone and you're safe, I reminded Cassandra. The financial crimes investigation will continue, but your immediate danger has passed. What about the wedding? She asked suddenly. All that money you spent, the venue, catering, flowers. Most of it's non-refundable at this stage, I acknowledged. But that's the least of my concerns right now. Cassandra looked at me with tears in her eyes. I'm so sorry, Mom, for everything. For doubting you, for shutting you out, for returning your check and uninviting you from my wedding. How do I ever make this right? I pulled her into an embrace, my own eyes filling with tears. You already have, by trusting me enough to call last night, by being brave enough to walk away when you realized something was wrong. That's all I ever wanted, for you to be safe and to trust your own judgment again. Later that day, as we monitored Richard's continued flight through a series of international connections, Vanessa arrived with news about the prenuptial agreement that had become the unexpected linchpin of this entire situation. The prenup worked exactly as intended, she explained, spreading documents across the table. Even though the wedding never happened, the preparation of the agreement triggered several protective mechanisms. The financial disclosure requirements revealed inconsistencies in Richard's accounts that are now part of the federal investigation, and the required background checks, though they didn't catch everything initially, created a paper trail that investigators are now following. So even though there was no wedding, the prenup still protected me? Cassandra asked. In a way, yes, Vanessa confirmed. It created a legal framework that made Richard's schemes more difficult and riskier. That's why he was so desperate to nullify it. I never thought I'd be grateful for a prenuptial agreement I didn't even want to sign, Cassandra said with a half smile. I remember being so annoyed when Mom insisted on it. I thought it showed a lack of faith in my judgment. It wasn't about your judgment, I clarified. It was about creating safety nets. That's what parents do. We try to anticipate dangers our children might not see or might be too optimistic to prepare for. As evening approached, we received final confirmation that Richard had successfully fled to a country with limited extradition capabilities. He was effectively beyond immediate reach of U.S. authorities, though international financial crime investigators would continue to track him. What now? Cassandra asked as we sat together in the safe house living room, the weight of the day's events settling around us. My life was about to start, and instead, everything's fallen apart. Not everything, I countered. You still have your career, your family, your future, all the things Richard would have taken from you. This isn't an ending, Cassandra. It's a course correction. She considered this, then nodded slowly. I need to rebuild, get back to the hospital, reconnect with friends I've neglected, figure out who I am again without Richard's influence. And you don't have to do any of that alone, Michael added. We're here for you, whatever you need. As darkness fell on what should have been her wedding night, Cassandra moved to the window, gazing out at the city lights. The prenup you insisted on really did change everything, didn't it? It created a barrier that Richard couldn't easily overcome, I acknowledged. But you were the one who recognized something was wrong when you found those forged documents. You were the one brave enough to call me, to leave in the middle of the night, to face the truth about the man you thought you loved. Give yourself credit for that strength. She turned to me, a new resolve in her eyes. I want to help catch him. Use my knowledge of his habits, his contacts, anything that might help authorities track him down. He shouldn't get away with this. Not just what he did to me, but all of it. That's my girl, I said softly, recognizing the determined set of her jaw. The same expression she'd worn when, at 10 years old, she had announced her intention to become a doctor despite being told the sciences were too difficult for her. The same determination that had carried her through medical school and surgical residency. The same inner strength that had always been there, temporarily obscured by Richard's manipulation, but never truly extinguished. In that moment, I knew with certainty that Cassandra would be okay. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. There would be legal proceedings, financial untangling, emotional healing. But the essential core of who she was remained intact. The prenup I had insisted on had indeed changed everything, not just by protecting her assets, but by creating the framework that ultimately revealed Richard's true nature. As a mother, I had done what I could to safeguard my daughter's future. But as a woman who had survived her own life's battles, I recognized that Cassandra's greatest protection would always be her own resilience, her own wisdom, her own strength, qualities that Richard had tried to diminish but had never managed to destroy. 6 months passed quickly. The autumn morning felt crisp as I sat across from Cassandra at our favorite cafe, watching her stir honey into her tea. The shadows that had haunted her eyes were finally fading. The FBI caught up with Richard in Malaysia yesterday, I told her, sliding my phone across the table to show her the email from our contact. Interpol had been tracking him since he crossed into Thailand. Cassandra glanced at the message, then pushed the phone back to me with surprising calmness. Good. Maybe now his other victims will get some justice too. Her resilience continued to amaze me. After the aborted wedding and Richard's escape, she had thrown herself into rebuilding her life with determination that would have made her father proud. She returned to her surgical practice, reconnected with friends Richard had isolated her from, and even started volunteering at a support group for survivors of financial abuse. The prosecutor says they have a solid case, I added. Between the evidence we gathered and what they've uncovered since, he's facing significant prison time. Cassandra nodded, her expression thoughtful. And his assets? Frozen. They're working to trace everything he stole and return it to the victims where possible. She smiled wryly. all because of a prenuptial agreement I didn't even want to sign. Sometimes protection comes from unexpected places, I agreed. We sat in comfortable silence for a moment, savoring our drinks and the simple pleasure of being together without crisis hanging over us. The journey to this point hadn't been easy. Cassandra had gone through all the stages of grief, denial, anger, bargaining, depression, before reaching acceptance. There had been days when she could barely get out of bed, consumed by self-recrimination for not seeing Richard's true nature sooner. But there had also been breakthroughs, the day she boxed up every gift Richard had ever given her and donated them to charity. The afternoon she spent hours reviewing the prenuptial agreement with Vanessa, understanding every clause that had ultimately protected her. The evening she laughed genuinely for the first time since everything fell apart. "I've been thinking about what you said," Cassandra broke the silence. "About using my experience to help others." "The educational foundation?" She nodded. "Financial literacy for young professionals, especially women. Teaching them to protect themselves legally and financially before entering serious relationships." "I think it's a wonderful idea," I told her. "And if you'd like, my firm could develop a security component, teaching people to recognize manipulation tactics and warning signs." "I'd like that," she said, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand. "We'd make a good team." Her phone buzzed with a text. "Michael's waiting outside. We should go if we're going to make the reservation." As we gathered our things, Cassandra paused, her expression suddenly vulnerable. "Mom, I never properly thanked you. Not just for saving me from Richard, but for being willing to risk our relationship to protect me. I know that wasn't easy. Being a mother never is," I told her honestly. "You make mistakes, you second-guess yourself constantly. But when it matters most, you trust your instincts and do whatever it takes to keep your child safe, even if they hate you for it." "I could never hate you," she said softly. "Even when Richard was trying his hardest to turn me against you, something inside me always knew you were in my corner." Outside, Michael waited by his car, smiling as he saw us approach. The three of us were heading to a small celebration lunch, marking both Cassandra's recent promotion to chief surgical resident and the final legal clearance confirming she bore no liability for any of Richard's financial crimes. Life hadn't turned out the way any of us had planned. There had been unexpected dangers, painful betrayals, and difficult reckonings. But standing there with both my children, I felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude for the journey that had brought us here. Stronger, wiser, and more deeply connected than before. Sometimes love means making difficult choices. Sometimes protection comes from unexpected sources. And sometimes the prenuptial agreement you never wanted to sign changes everything in the best possible way. If you've enjoyed this story of resilience and redemption, please consider subscribing to my channel for more inspiring true stories about women overcoming life's greatest challenges. Each week, we share journeys of courage, wisdom, and triumph that remind us of the strength we all carry within. Hit that subscribe button now and join our community of survivors and thrivers.